Today we will discuss the utilitarianism by John Stuart Mill. So go into the readings which I provided to you. So I provided you with the readings on utilitarianism. It's the one that I'm going to discuss today. If you recall in our previous discussion on Jeremy Bentham's utilitarianism, the greatest pleasure for the greatest number. So here the in Mill we have the principle on the greatest happiness principle, the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Utilitarians believe that our moral theory should be grounded on the greatest happiness for the greatest number. That the right action is the one that provides the consequence of happiness, one that leads to happiness. The wrong action is the reverse, one that leads to pain. So we have a very simple way of structuring our moral system that an act is right when it leads to a particular consequence, which is happiness, and wrong when it leads to pain. So, but then and then utilitarians also said that pleasure and freedom from pain are the only things that are desirable as ends, and that happiness can be desirable as inherent in itself or as means to a higher end. Okay, but then John Stuart Mill said there is a problem with that idea. If we're going to base the result of our action on the consequence of pleasure to be attained, then life has no higher end than pleasure. Mill asked, is life does life have no other end than pleasure? Is there no other end than pleasure? So, if this is the case, if pleasure is our only purpose or end in life, then it seems that our existence is simply equivalent that of the animal. In the word in the text, he termed it swine. If our life is merely desired in the attainment of pleasure, or the attainment of a pleasurable result, then our action is simply uh, qualifies as the same as that of animal. So it would mean that there's no difference between us and animals. Okay, so he said we should refrain from human nature to be placed in a degrading light, as if human beings are capable of nothing except pleasure shared by swines. This is his criticism. If man and the swine or animals are the same, and man or beast are the same, this is totally degrading to our nature. Why? Because man is not the same as with animals. The function of man is to reason. Man is rational. Thus, his pleasure may not be the same, is not the same as that of animals. Pleasure is of a higher kind when it comes to rational beings. It couldn't just be identified with that of swines or animals. I quote, but a beast's pleasure do not satisfy a human being's conception of happiness. A beast's pleasures do not satisfy a human being's conception of happiness. So it doesn't satisfy. The happiness of man is not the same as the happiness of a beast, precisely because man is rational. And being rational, we would be looking for a kind of happiness that fits our nature as rational beings. Okay, so human beings, according to Mill, have faculties higher than that of the animal appetite. So, so the nature of man is higher and different from animals. Therefore, what gives you pleasure is derived from your nature. So it is derived from your nature. So the nature of man is higher and different from that of the animals. So what gives you pleasure should be derived from the nature that you have. Animal pleasures are reduced to mere sensation, whereas the pleasure of a human being comes from his rational nature, and therefore it's not just the pleasure of sensation. For animals, they are reduced to the pleasure of sensation. Human beings' happiness is not reduced to sensation. No man is contented with a happiness based on sensation only. Being rational, we're looking for something higher than sensation. Thus, he says, as human beings, there are pleasures of the intellect, pleasures of the imagination, pleasures of moral sentiments, and these kinds of pleasures are higher than pleasures of sensation. For instance, what are pleasures of the intellect? The pleasure of reflection, the pleasure of thinking correctly, the pleasure of deciding and deliberating, the pleasure of intellectual discourse. These are pleasures that are higher than pleasure of sensation. We've known it from ancient philosophies in which there are types of pleasures that you attain higher than mere sensation when you indulge in abstract thinking, when you indulge in thinking that are equivalent to Plato's world of forms. Okay, pleasures of the imaginations which befits human nature. I'll give you an example. Only human beings or rational beings have the pleasure in the creation of arts. The art creation in a form of music, painting, sculpting. These are pleasures found among rational beings, and they constitute higher forms of pleasures rather than than mere experience of sensation. Of course, in painting and in other forms of art, sensation, there is a pleasure of sensation, but it's a kind of a pleasure which is connected with the mind, with reason, and it's not pure experience of the senses, but a sense of taste which has got to do with the feeling of being rational. The feeling of moral sentiments. I'll give you an example. There's a higher pleasure when we indulge in the deliberation of conscience. What our conscience finds out, what our sense of right and wrong are, and how we deliberate on them. Animals do not engage in moral deliberations. They do not engage in moral choices. And for me, these are pleasures or forms of happiness higher than animal sensation or animal forms of pleasures, which are merely reduced to bodily sensations. Okay, the superiority of mental over bodily pleasures is the concern of a rational man, as they are permanent and costly and safety. I'll give you an example. Permanent because if you go back to Aristotle, we possess reason and it is inherent in our nature. And so the rational activity stays with us until the end. I'm quoting my example from the point of view of Aristotle, but this is the context of meal. And costly because there are forms of mental pleasures where you don't even have to spend a penny or a dime or a pesos. It is more costly when you drink outside, but there is no cost when you read books. So, and at the same time, it is safety. Your life is endangered when you indulge in pleasures that are derived from sensations, whereas pleasures of the intellect are more safety, and they are intrinsic in you and not just circumstantial, according to Mill. The pleasure of sensations are usually measured in terms of quantity. That's what Bentham is often doing. Whereas the pleasure of reason is based on quality. That's what Mill is saying. So Mill wants to emphasize that we should focus on the quality of pleasure, quality of happiness. It is quality that determines the happiness, that is as to which is more valuable than the others. Let me stop and continue in my next video.